Welcome, Russell Howcroft.
Hello, Amy.
For those of you there's not anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure, who you are, Russ. I've known Russ for a very long time. We grew up in advertising. He then went and did some extraordinary things with Gruen and also is now on 3AW, keeping us all sane and commenting on the world. He's also an author. He is a big proponent of creative thinking and is an all-round legend.
Thanks, Amy. That's nice.
That's nice.
Good on you. I appreciate that, Ames. Thank you.
Well, I've got to say, it's all true. And also, when I saw you on Gruen talking about how tough it is to be 30 at the moment,
Yeah.
it sort of chimed with a report that we've done that was across all sectors, but that said that particular cohort, what we call languishing and living directionless and feeling fairly flat lives. And when you said what you said, I kind of went, wow, that's that's no surprise there. So maybe we
Yeah.
revisit that. What's going on with 30-year-olds?
Well, I just think that the facts. It's the facts which I think is most important. It's extreme. So let's say if you're 30 right now, it's extremely difficult to. Well, it's very difficult to live what perhaps you might have expected to live. It's very difficult to live the life that you're used to as a 30-year-old when you were brought up by your family. Whatever the shape of the family is, it's extremely difficult to lead. Let's call it the nuclear family, to live an aspirational life. That's very, very tough.
Yep.
To actually deliver against the dream. So you might have spent, your growing up years thinking, oh, I'd quite like to own a house, or I'd quite like to have a really strong job. I'd like to have a career of sorts. I'd like to get married. I'd like, all the normal stuff. Like,
Yeah.
no big deal. No big deal. Just the stuff that people have done for centuries.
Yep.
And yet right now, if you're 30 years of age and you're living in Australia, it's very difficult. So if you just look at the average salary between, let's say, 75 and maybe 75, they might get to
Yep.
$100,000 a year.
Yep.
And yet your average house, your average apartment in Melbourne, which of course is where we are, you're doing well to get something for 750,000.
Yeah.
So if you just use the old model, multiply your salary. When you and I were at 30,
Yeah.
multiply your salary by 3, and that was where you should go in search of a house or an apartment or where you wanted to live, right?
And you knew
So
that a bank would look at that and be supportive of that number. Like you knew it was within reach.
yeah. So well, the house was within reach, but broadly speaking, whatever you earned, multiply it by 3, and then you could go and acquire yourself property. So now it's multiplied by 8.
Yeah,
Now,
crazy.
what happens now, of course, is that the older folk, they say, yeah, but the interest rates were 11, 12, 13, and of course they got up to like 14, 15%. The interest rates were different. So you do have to take that into account. But then, okay, let's overlay the fact that many of the 30-year-olds, probably 40%, they've all got HEX debt.
Yeah.
And
Which we
over
didn't have.
No HEX debt. And over the last 10 years, your HEX debt has actually doubled. So it's not unusual for a 30-year-old with HEX with a debt of 30, 35, even $40,000. You want to, of course, get yourself a deposit. So let's say it's an $800,000 property. It's probably going to be $1 million, really. You've got to
Yeah.
get okay, so let's say 10%. Some banks want more than that. So you got to find yourself $100,000, right? Save $100,000.
How do
In
you
the
do that?
meantime,
Yeah.
the cost of living, of course, has gone up dramatically in the last few years. I think the last few years is costing you $25,000 extra just to sort of go about your day. Not over the last few years, $25,000.
You're not drinking champagne and eating, like we're talking just day to
That's
day.
right.
Yeah.
But see, the champagne thing I think is interesting as well, Amy, because Of course, this cohort has been criticised. Well, they're not saving any money; they're going out and having goat's cheese and avocado on toast. Now, there is some truth to that, but that's because the sheer size of the mountain that they're confronted. Right.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I have this enormous mountain in front of me. I've got to get rid of my HECS. I've got to get myself a deposit. There's no way I'm earning $80,000. I'd quite like to live in that house over there. That's 800,000. How can I possibly do that? You know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
go out with my friends and
Yeah.
have avocado and bloody goat's cheese on toast, right?
I reckon, I mean, this is kind of an interesting thing too, against the backdrop of what we've seen with this world international kind of happiness report, because one of the key things was the need for social connection, almost surpassing anything else that, that we've slipped, and we have not managed to maintain ourselves in the top 10.
Yes.
The countries that have experienced, I guess, more happiness are very differently organized from ours. And I think particularly for kids, one of the things that kind of seems to be lacking is that their well-being um, is is now being kind of overtaken with mental health struggles.
Yeah.
Um, Even in North America and Western Europe, the lowest well-being of all age groups is young people, and life satisfaction, particularly steep around those kind of at 30 or under, is
Yeah.
almost like, it's like you said, it's like out of our grasp, it's out of our reach. So I feel very sad about
Yes.
that, because it's
Yes.
such, you're really in your prime in those years, and it's time to hustle and it's time to really enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
but
still think,
that's changed, hasn't it? That's really
yeah.
changed.
Well, I think it has changed if we just look at traditional structures. I think it has changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, well, let's use us as an example, Amy.
Yep.
So it is true that I was multiply the salary that I was earning at 30 years of age by 3, and I was able to afford a house in inner Melbourne, which would probably now be, if it went for sale, that house would probably be worth $2 million. Right. So we were structurally in an amazing position. We probably didn't realize it at the time, but
No.
we were in an amazing position. So if you want to sort of lead that life at 30, good luck. Good luck. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are you going to do? If you're ambitious, I think if you're ambitious, you're probably going to try and find another direction, because I was paid that amount of money, i.e. my workplace could afford to pay me
Yep.
a figure that enabled me to buy a house in a city, Melbourne. So those organisations are not going to be able to pay today's 30-year-old the $700,000 a year that enables
Yep.
them to buy the $2.1 million house that I bought 30 years ago, right? It's just,
Yep.
it's not going to happen. So hopefully, that means that they'll try and find another way. And my view, Amy, is that the mountain is too big. Let's call it that traditional mountain. It
Yep.
is too big.
So change the mountain.
Yeah. So I think changing the mountain's very tough, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk about that. We can talk about, okay, so what can you do to actually make that mountain less steep, less difficult, less, frankly, impossible? What can you do? Which isn't just, around the edges, because
No, because
it's huge.
it's huge, but also, there was a certain amount that was connected to, if I earn this and I can achieve that, then I can do this, then I can do that. If
Yeah,
if that's gone, then what's the point?
it's
And
gone.
I've had that, with one of my daughters who, first of all, can I just say, I don't think they're ever going to leave home. Right. I think we're now in a situation where we're living with our, kids that are in their 20s. And even if we look at some of the stuff that's happened recently with the Medibank campaign, where they're looking at talking about mental health, there were some case histories yesterday about, people as old as 30, 35 still living at home, for
Yeah,
all sorts of reasons. So
yeah,
that's really changed the dynamic as well. And it also means that there's the we used to think, great, the kids have left home, and we can now live a bit for ourselves. Many of us are now going, right, we've still got the kids and the financial burden of the kids, and we don't want them to move out because we want them to be able to save to do all of those sort of things. But mum and dad aren't doing too well either, and they
That's
need
right.
a amount of support. And then you've got this sort of sandwich generation in the middle who are really struggling to kind of find their own meaning amongst, I guess, the pressures of children and adults and still working. So
Yeah.
I think I'd love to ask in the chat how many people are experiencing that at the moment. How many people are looking after both sides of the spectrum and feeling a little bit overwhelmed about it.
Well, I mean, there's every right for the mums and dads of the 30-year-olds to be, they're in a sort of semi or maybe even panicking. I was going to say semi state of panic, mild state of panic, or just literal panic. That's fair because, okay, so if the 30-year-old struggling, the 30-year-old may well still be at home there, and your household expenses are still a family's household expenses. So,
That's
but
right.
at the time when you thought you'd be saving, because retirement is not very far away. At the time that you thought you'd be saving, you're not saving. You're continuing to participate
Provide.
in, provide. So,
Yeah.
so what does that mean? I think again, the traditional structures that we're actually, this conversation is assuming that that the traditional structures is the structure. Maybe it's not, right?
Maybe
So,
it's not.
mm,
And we haven't legitimized that. Like if you think about it, you and I've worked a long time. We eventually got, parental leave. We got some acknowledgement, at least, that, children require time and effort for both parents. Um, but there's still this kind of pressure to keep it all together and to keep going and just push through. And it doesn't surprise me when, Stella, who's my oldest, said, Mum, I don't want to do anything like you because you just look stressed all the time. And I thought, oh my gosh, do
yeah.
you have any idea how hard this is? This isn't exactly something I thought I would be doing, and yet here we are.
Yeah, yeah. But again, that's another example of okay, the mountain's too high, so I'm going to move. I'm going to go around the mountain, and and I think we're going to see a lot of that. Um, I believe that young people they still want to start a family. They'll still want to get married, or maybe not get married, just have a life partner and start a family. Because in the end, there's a very strong urge to do that. And so that'll still happen, but I think that I do think they'll live life differently. I think that the regions, if the Victorian regions, they're already experiencing some really interesting growth. And that to me is a reshaping of the state that you and I live in. I
Yep.
think that we're at the beginning of a complete reshaping of our state,
Okay. Can you
whereby
tell me more about that? That sounds very interesting.
yeah, I think that, well, if we just sort of think about Britain, the way that the Brits live or the French live, what you'll do, of course, is you'll have your 20s in the capital, and then you'll find a partner, late 30s, and you might find that get married, then they'll move out. And they will move out of the main centre of commerce, the centre of their professional life or whatever life they're leading in order to bring money into the household. Then they'll leave, and they'll bring up their family in the regions. Yeah, and
Yeah.
those regions will be an hour and a half to 2 hours out of town. This is where Victoria is hugely advantaged, Amy, because we have already got the hub and spoke of the train system, whether it's Bendigo, Ballarat, Horsham,
Yep.
Castlemaine, Geelong, right? The system already exists, as in the train system and the freeway system already exists for that to, I think that's going to become the rhythm
Well,
of our cities.
I
Yeah,
think it's interesting because both my children have said very strongly they don't want to live in the city. They want to live somewhere that just feels more connected to nature. They want to be able to, grow their own veggies and do all that
yeah.
sort of stuff.
So
But you,
that Yeah. So
which
that
is really
sounds
interesting,
like,
to be more self-sufficient.
yeah, yes, exactly. So that sounds like, what you and I would see, what you and I would view that as checking out, maybe, right? So when our friends did that, it's like, oh, come on, like get with the program, right? No, no,
Yep.
no. I think that sort of decision making is based on the fact that the mountain's too big, right? So
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm,
Well,
I'm gonna I'm gonna find another way, right? Another
got to
way
find another way,
around that.
and maybe the things that were traditionally important really aren't, because it is down to quality of life. And I think that is a different thing, and the way we measure that. I'm just looking at some of these things in the chat. And firstly, everyone, I didn't even say welcome. I mean, that's just so bad. I just went into a hello, Russell Howcroft. So can I just
Oh,
welcome everyone halfway through to say, so bad of me. We love doing these, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. I love these comments because, look at this, mid-30s, don't live at home, paying crazy amounts in rent, parents
yeah,
still working to help. Looking at 35, people who have parents who are getting dementia and all those sort of things,
yeah,
really, really tough, still working. And not just working, having to accommodate the caring of, and that's almost a full-time job in itself when you've got someone who's in that state as a parent.
yeah.
I I don't I mean I want us to, I think the most important thing is understanding that you have agency over yourself to a certain extent, but you may not necessarily know how to navigate it. And I
That's
certainly
right.
feel, yeah, like understanding the never-ending bank of mum, for example, for my children, which, I just feel like a life support system and an ATM. Um, but it is up to me to sort of also set some of those boundaries. I've cared for, my husband who died of cancer, dad, then straight after that. So I've had a few years of that, and realizing that actually, this is life. This isn't, I'm not a victim. This is actual real life, and it's up to me to work out how to make it work for me in order to live too. And that's the stuff that I think super hard for people, because it's complicated. It's really complicated. And
It is. It
and
is.
workplaces, I don't know, although, you kind of get told that there's an EAP service, or there's this or there's that. It's not that it's that bad that you want to make that big a deal out of it, but for the shape of work in the future, if we want people to work and pay tax, then maybe the mountain at work needs to shift as well. Like
Well,
maybe that construct needs to shift too.
yeah, well, and then let's overlay, well, the impact that AI is going to have on the many jobs that were, let's call them mainly professional jobs. Really, they're significantly under threat as a result of AI. So if your child wants to be a stonemason, good idea, I'd suggest. Yeah,
Yeah.
the anything with your hands, anything creative, anything that is differentiates us from humans, from the machine. That's going to be a big part of where I think growth is going to come from. We then have this, I think, dramatic issue when it comes to those that are the digital divide, let's call it that.
Yep.
Those that really understand the way that the modern world works when it just comes to the digitization of everything,
Yeah.
and all those people that are being left behind because they don't have the digital skills. They're unsure on how to obtain them. They feel completely disconnected from society, and I think this isn't just older people. I think this is a significant cohort of people.
Right.
And again, I think that adds to the mountain again, right? Because it's the rise of the nerds, Amy. So they
Hang
got
on, we had Napoleon Dynamite. Like we
yeah,
had,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he's cool right now, like super
right,
cool.
right. So there's that's I think that's a significant issue which is not really discussed. The digital, let's just call it the digital divide, the haves and have-nots around that. And then, of course, let's have another input into how difficult it is. The wealth gap, the wealth divide. This is Australia, Amy. Wow.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's increasingly not really feeling like the Australia that we grew up in, where
Yeah.
like there really was a lot of middle class, a
Yeah.
lot of middle
Yeah.
class,
Yeah.
a few rich people and a few poor people, but a chunk load of middle class,
Yeah. We
right?
were all
So
just sort of jostling around.
yeah, so the shape of society was more like a AFL football.
Yeah.
At the top where the bit is where you put the air in. That's where there were a few rich people. We all knew their names. You
Yeah.
know, and then on the bottom, that's where the poor were. And it literally it was fat around the
Yeah.
middle class. And so
Fat and flat.
over
It's
time, it's
changed.
been turned into a triangle. Uh, Middle class is under serious, as discussed. Like the 30-year-old who had middle class aspiration, good luck. Right? I have
Yeah.
to say, I was pleased to see in the budget last night that public schools, state schools, high schools, state schools, they
Yeah.
actually now are all going to be genuinely free.
Yep.
Um, which, of course, they haven't really been genuinely free because mum and dad would be asked for money. I
Yep.
think I believe that's going to contribute to a significant trend as well. I think there will be a lot more people sending their children to state schools. I mean, Victoria has got amongst the highest penetration of private schooling in the world. I think that'll go. I think that'll reverse because I think that mountain's too big, right?
It's too big, and it's out of touch as well. I think a couple of things just picking up, from the report, the social disconnection is rising among young adults, which surprises me. 39% increase since 2006,
Social
and
disconnection.
this is just social disconnection rising. It's 90% of young adults globally reported having no one they could count on for social support in 2023. How is that possible? I mean, imagine the loneliness, and since COVID, it's just steadily increasing, and they don't necessarily see their peers or society as it actually is. They assume that it's worse, so they're defaulting to that kind of bias that we have,
Yeah.
underestimating, you know, how empathetic and supportive it is. So they're sort of avoiding social interaction. Um,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
we're in a way we're doing it here, Amy, because a lot of what's happened in their life is catastrophization of everything, right?
yep.
Yeah, and so the world's going to hell in a handbasket. We're we're going to run out of you know
Electricity, we're going to run out of fuel, we're going to
yeah
have to knit our own clothes. I don't
yeah.
know. I don't
So
know. I think this is a massive thing, because what it's doing is just saying, don't go out there and get into it and find stuff you enjoy. Just avoid the lot.
well, that's right. So the catastrophization, and then of course that's amplified because of one's algorithm.
Yeah.
That clearly doesn't help matters. So you get onto your feed, and the feed, you'll find something interesting. That interesting thing that's attractive is likely to be negative because, unfortunately, we click through negative at 7 times the rate that we click through positive. So, so we find ourselves
Do we know why
interested.
that is? Is that because we just love drama?
Well, it's always, well, I don't know the underlying psychology behind it, but it's always been the case that negative sells, right? So in the pre-digital era, a newspaper's front page would be, we're all going to hell, right? That will be the
Yeah.
front page.
Yeah.
That would get the sale. That got the sale of the newspaper. But then everything else in the newspaper didn't have and didn't have to have a negative headline.
Yeah.
Now, every single article's got to pay its way. As
Yeah.
a result, every single article that is written in this news context, the journalist, the sub-editor, the publication has got to find a negative way in,
Yeah.
because they know that the negative headline gets a click through at 7 times the rate. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that negativity is a business plan,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
So
So
scary, isn't it? It's so
yeah,
scary.
yeah. So
Well,
what do you do about
what do you
that?
do?
Well, I tell you
When
what
you
it
try
does.
to explain, I've said to my girls, pardon the swearing, but I've said, look, it's shit in, shit out, right? So if your algorithm is just serving you up crap all the time, and let's face it, 60% of us are scrolling before we get up to pee in the morning, and you're starting your day with all of that bias and all of that negativity, and which is something you can control, by the way. I've subscribed to the Daily Oz Good newsletter every day just to make sure that I have that in my head,
Right.
because there is stuff, and I started sending it to the girls. And of course, one of them says, because she's, but refuses to see anything positive. She said, "It's just not true, Mum." And I'm like, well, it is true. So we don't, even when you're even when you're presented with
Yeah.
facts about good stuff, there's still this reluctance to see it,
Yeah.
which,
Well, this is I agree with you. I mean, I have a massive issue around. I think there's a pillar of education. I think part of the education of kids these days is just negativity, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah, and how
like
to consume it and
yeah,
amplify it.
and everything's wrong with the world. I do sometimes think that often a lot of commentary comes from a place where the commentator actually doesn't like humans, right? They don't. They
What do you
they
mean?
don't really like what. See, I like humans. I like what humans can do. Yes, yes, humans can do bad things. Yeah, but the vast majority of what is done by humans
Yeah,
is joyful, beautiful, creative,
yeah,
wonderful. The vast majority. Yeah, and yet we seem to be taught all about the bad stuff. Maybe we taught about the bad stuff in order to ensure that we don't do the bad stuff. I'm not so sure that that's the effect that it has.
yeah.
I think that the effect that it has is depression.
Yeah, or languishing, as we keep saying, which is kind of the middle child, where you just sort of feel like life is pointless. And it's another big fact from the report that social trust is at an all-time low. Well, institutions, governance has dropped, decline in, and it's no wonder, declining trust in politicians, and people feeling very unhappy. And so they're sort of drawn into the extremes rather than something that feels more balanced. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
you know,
far left, far right. I mean, this whole thing I think is so difficult to navigate, particularly if you're consuming a diet of, as you say, negativity, and
yeah.
not really seeing, I don't know, seeing the other stuff.
Well,
Um,
you know what, you're reminding me of Paul Keating, Amy. So Paul Keating, of course, a extraordinary orator, great leader, a gutsy politician. Yeah,
yeah,
and it's quite interesting, sort of the leadership that he provided. He provided exceptional leadership, really. And I'll give you an example. He said, "You know what? Australia's future's in Southeast Asia. We all need to point ourselves to the Asians and forget about what's going on in the home in the old
yeah,
country."
yeah,
Right.
in old
So
blighty.
what? Yeah. So what did we all do? Well, what did business do? Business got on planes, went to Asia, and started creating businesses in Asia. Right.
Yeah,
They've many of them have subsequently subsided away, but that
yeah,
is what we did. We recognised there was an opportunity, um, for us to expand our horizon, our commercial horizon, get on a plane for half the time that it takes to get to the east coast of the USA or Europe, get on a plane and go and build businesses. Why? Because direction was provided. It is so.
yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm being a little simplistic about it, but it feels right to me that that's what happened. And when you think about, okay, did you watch the budget last night?
No, I've only read the summary this morning
Okay, so is there
on
any
my
is there
daily
any
Oz.
good? Well, is there any big picture leadership direction
Nothing.
purpose?
It's like
Um,
blancmange. It is the wettest. It is
yeah,
so boring. And I don't know
yeah.
how people are feeling who are watching this webinar. Did anybody have anything to say about fixing anything, or just, I mean, I'd love to hear from the peeps on the call, because I thought this morning, I can't even be bothered watching it now I've read the summary. But it's
Well, here's
crushing.
if you're 30 years of age, if you're 30 years of age and you hear the following, you might get depressed, Amy. Right, more depressed than what you and I are about to get when I tell you. So, Harvard, yeah, Harvard is just they do their complex economy index, right?
Yeah,
So, complex economies. So, a complex economy would be something like South Korea or Japan, right?
yep,
Where technology amazing,
yeah,
incredible value add, global brands, sophisticated economy. Now, I'm not suggesting that Australia is a sophisticated economy. We're not. We're not. So I'm not saying we should be in the top 10 of complex, sophisticated economies. But what I would say to you, Aim, is it's depressing when you find out that we're between Senegal and Yemen. We are
my God.
102nd on the list of sophisticated economies in the Harvard Sophisticated Economy table. We were 60th in the year 2000. So over the course of this century, we've managed to find ourselves drop from 60 to 102. So I tell you what, if I was 30, I don't know that I'd be that happy with that number.
No. And, someone's just put in the chat that the real problems we're facing are too difficult for our governments to deal with. And the debt thing, which, is just staggering as well. I mean, to govern, they've got to have money. And, they've also got to be able to manage that money to deliver the
Yeah,
solutions that we're facing as Aussies in real life. That whole trajectory or that whole linkage seems to have just disappeared.
right.
Because even if we borrow, all this other money to do all this other stuff, some of which is just spurious and nonsense, then, how do we then pay it back? Like at some point, you've
Well,
got to pay it back.
yeah, I'll go halfway on that, Aim. I think the great news is if your government, so Margaret Thatcher used to talk about, the government is like your household. Now, that's not actually true, right? Because your household, my household, at some point in time, the money runs out, right? So if you stop working, when you're no longer on this earth, the money stops. So if you need to be paying off debt and you've stopped, then you've got a problem, right?
Yep.
There's no more money coming in, but there's still debt, then you've got an issue. If your government, there's money coming in into eternity, right? So it's okay to have debt, right? Because you can continuously pay it off, and you need debt for capital works, you need debt for development, etc. The bit I don't know the answer to is how much is too much. So
As in
the,
debt.
yeah, so the
Yeah. Yeah.
headline, when you say that the headline is we are $1 trillion in debt for 26 million people, that does seem like a lot.
It
Right?
does.
Right, so
Well, and I think it's like something like 30 or 40% of what France is. And, there's a few more people there. So
right.
I sit there and go, well, are we just bad at managing it? I mean, there's a couple of really wonderful comments about, if you've got it all on, if you're trying to do all of this, um, and you've accepted, like Angela's just said, I'll own my own house, or I've accepted I probably will never own my own house, be able to have children, and
Right.
I'm not alone in this. So she's
Yep.
learning to live in the present, take each day that comes, and keep well-being intact. See, this is, and Angela, that is such a it's such a great but devastating thing, because if you look at the birth rate, we've gone from 2 point, I think it was 2 or 4 to
Yep. Yep.
1.3. So we are actually not having children. And I don't believe that's as much. And I don't believe that's because we don't want to. I think a lot of people are sitting there going, I just don't even know how I'd feed them.
Well, if you catastrophize the here and if you catastrophize the here and now and make that mountain so big, why would you? Right? So why would you have children?
Yeah.
And this again is why I think it's a huge ask to ask for that mountain to be blown up. I don't know how that gets blown up. I really don't. I'd like it to be, but I don't know. I don't know how that happens. So
Yep.
finding a
Yeah.
way finding a way around the mountain is I think what is going to happen more and more.
And maybe
Um,
finding another. I mean, this is an interesting question for Maddie, who I work with, who's one of the researchers at Be Well. Where is leadership in Australia likely to come from?
yeah, Yeah, and well, the inverted commas only leadership that matters in the end is political leadership, right? Yeah, in that's where the levers are to make the changes.
Yeah.
You can have, you can be the leader of the AFL, and you can determine that you're going to celebrate Indigenous culture. These are all good things, of
Yep.
course.
Yep.
But in the end, the levers that matter are the treasury levers. They're the levers that matter, and that happens in Parliament, both state and federal. I have to say, I think state Parliament matters enormously, state politics, but that's where you have to look for the leaders for sure. And wow, there are a lot of talented people that aren't in politics, and so
that's the issue. I mean, you look at sort of Singapore, where they hire top CEOs and pay really well. I don't know. And it seems from, to be saying this from the sidelines, if you said to me, well, okay, Am, you go for it.
Yeah.
There's no way I'd want to do it.
I think you should. You most definitely should. Just don't just go somewhere. Just go somewhere where you can make a genuine difference, right? And I say this. There's a risk associated with what I'm about to say, but one of the two major parties, because that way you can genuinely make a difference. This, in a way, this is a bit of a conclusion I've come to, somewhat recently, in that if someone said, "Oh, why don't you join the Libertarian Party?" I'd probably say, "Great idea," but the problem is that's not really where influence actually occurs, and where the government benches are, whether they're Labor benches or Liberal benches. I think you've got to be there. See, it's very risky for our country right now if there is a minority government, and the government's got to be formed by various coalitions after the coming election. We don't want that now. We
want leadership and action, and we want 30-year-olds to feel like they're in the prime of their lives. We want them to feel like there's hope, don't we?
Most definitely. And again, I do think that was it Angela? I think it was Angela looking for the leadership. That is where it's got to come from. It has got to come from political leadership for a whole of country effect to take effect. You can be the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank. If you're CEO of the Commonwealth Bank is probably in the top 10 banks in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So you have serious influence.
You could affect policy around that stuff too.
Yeah, you can. But in the end, you're not determining direction, right? You're just not.
No, and someone who's literally on a percentage, 1% of your salary is. So this is the other thing, right? That it's just not that interesting. Stephanie Lowe's just said people complain about how much politicians are paid, but I have the unpopular opinion we should really pay them more so we can attract better people. And I'm on that as well, because otherwise we just find ourselves in a quagmire of just nothingness, and people who've never had experience in the real world, they're just career politicians. But I feel like politics for, well, certainly my 20 to sort of 25-year-olds, they are so disengaged from it. They're so bored by it. They literally, it's like game show hosts to them. They don't understand that their way of life and their opportunity is directly connected to those people.
Well, that's you'd have to say that's school's fault, isn't it? Right. So how can, and I also have the same experience. I'm sitting in the Good One offices right now. Good One, a bunch of people in the girls, boys, mid to late 20s, a beautiful little creative shop. They're doing very well. I had an amazing discussion the other day where it's like, what is democracy anyway, Russ? So expensive school fees and all. So it's really okay. I do think, unfortunately, getting back to this digital world, the digital world is what contributes to that, because I get my, in inverted commas, news from my feed. I don't really actually have a genuine interaction with the actual news of the day.
No.
Yeah. So I getting back to good one, I love coming in here in the morning with the newspapers, and I
Yeah.
put the newspapers on the table
Yeah.
and say, "Do you know
Let's look
what?
at them.
Yeah, and this could be really exciting because you'll find every single time you open up a newspaper, you'll find an opportunity. You will
Yeah.
absolutely find one, right?
That's right.
So,
That your
mm,
algorithm isn't serving you up. Well, this is a nice way to kind of, because we've got 5 minutes more. So I was going to just to end on a high,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Looking at solutions. In the report, strengthening social bonds came up again and again, that social ties during young adulthood are so important. And, you and I have known each other since we were, what, 14 or something? Um,
yeah,
and we've been pretty much, with the same core group that we've known, that we were rusted onto as kids.
yeah,
But I think there's a lot of opportunity to encourage and help younger people recognize that their peers are a source of great empathy and support, and to improve social connection,
yeah.
and shared experiences that like, I don't know, I can only get my kids to come to dinner once a week and share a meal, and we may have to have Uno, and maybe Uno No Mercy. I had to pick up 35 cards last week and they thought it was hilarious. But at least, we were having a shared experience. I'd love to hear from anyone on the chat. Um, what are the things that we can do to improve how we're feeling, or what are the things you're doing day to day that help you kind of get out of, I know it's so brilliant, get out of that funk and that fog, to sort of,
Yeah.
not walk around eyes wide shut. What do you do anything, Russ, that to kind of balance it? And do you suggest anything?
Well, I think rhythm. I think rhythm is everything, Amy. I really do. And so what I'm doing on
You
a
did play
Wednesday,
drums.
yeah, yeah, and I suppose I adhere to that in all things.
Yep.
I think that every Saturday having lunch with your mother,
Yep.
every Wednesday going to the gym,
Yep.
um, occasionally on a Sunday taking your mother to church, very occasionally. But I often think about that. So whatever your religion is, it's weekly rhythm, yeah,
It's the rhythm. Yeah.
and I think that that's something that's been it's lost on the majority of people, and yet there's a rhythm to that, which I think is very, and obviously social connection. These things, they've been around for centuries, centuries and centuries.
But we've been too
Perhaps
busy.
perhaps for a reason, Aim.
Yeah. Well, they've endured. And also, whether or not, I mean, I remember before Dad, about 6 months, 8 months before Dad died, we introduced Taco Tuesdays. Now, at that
Yeah,
point, Dad had never seen a taco in his life, and he loved eating with his hands, and he'd end up looking like Les Patterson by the end of it, but he just adored it. So we had
yeah,
that thing, and I think creating those rituals, or those, as you say, rhythms,
yeah.
in ways that
Well, I
align
went
with your
to
values, that are things that you enjoy,
yeah,
are
yeah.
really important.
I went to a Shabbat dinner on last Friday evening, which of course is part of the traditional Jewish every Friday family. Right.
Yeah.
I was invited into a home, and it was glorious, absolutely
Yeah.
glorious.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there was Hebrew. There was ritual, and then we all ate and chatted, right?
Yeah.
And
Gorgeous.
it was, and so okay, so here's a group of very lucky people because they've been doing it for thousands of years, and maybe
Yeah.
there's something in that, right?
Maybe there's something in that. I think quality connections too, and not relying on, phones and all that sort of stuff. Um, Really important. I also, one of the things that we're trying to do is turn well-being into a verb at Be Well Co. So do
Yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah,
Do
yeah.
stuff. Don't wait for it to come to you. Do things, and find out through self-reflection what are the things that you actually enjoy doing, and
I
do
think
them. I
it's
know that sounds really simplistic, but
no,
it's kind of where things need to be to balance all this out.
for sure. So I'm a big fan of rhythm, as I say, Aim. I think that is critical. Certainly, that's what I've found as time has gone on. That absolutely contributes to just me feeling good, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I just try and encourage that, those that are to those that are close to me, right? Just
Yeah. Yeah.
stick to the rhythm.
Stick to the rhythm. What a great way to end. Not be a slave to the rhythm, Russ.
No, well, you know what? That mightn't be bad either, really. Yeah.
Just enjoy and create that rhythm that works for you.
Hey, I had one question for you, Amy.
Yes.
Um, what was your motto at school?
Oh, nominus. Oh, I can't remember. I mean,
Oh,
it was something like, you know, fairness and love to all. It was something like that.
well, let's go with that. Fairness and love to all, right? So,
Yep.
as you went through that institution, I thought they would have drummed it into you, Amy, right? As you go through, right, and so just thinking about the bigger picture, there is something around just in our old world, in our old brand world, a what is the core purpose of this brand? What's its core proposition? You can think about that for yourself, for
Yeah.
your family.
Yep.
Yeah. I do believe in defining core
What your
purpose.
Yep,
I
agreed.
do. I
Purpose
do.
is so important. And it can't just be to please others. It can't. There's a whole other session on that, which, we could talk about for hours.
I
Russ,
just
I'm
see
so
Kevin.
grateful. I'm so grateful that you did this.
Thanks,
Um,
Ames.
it was just terrific. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Nice to meet you
Next
all.
time. Okay. Bye.